Enthusiast circles tend to overlap, and you don't see that more often than with cars and watches. I mean, honestly, it doesn't get more quintessential watch nerd than a chronograph and a classic car.
Today we're going for a drive in a 60s era Ford Mustang with a 60s inspired watch on our wrist. This is the Zenith Chronomaster Original in the Tri-Color configuration, also known as the El Primero, for this edition of A Week on the Wrist.
When it comes to chronographs, a few brands spring to mind. You have Omega with the Speedmaster, Rolex with the Daytona, Tag Heuer with the Carrera. Zenith, for a mainstream audience, is quite possibly the most overlooked brand, especially when you consider just how good a chronograph movement it has made and still makes. And maybe that has something to do with the fact that people are nervous about how to pronounce the brand name. Is it Zenith? Is it Zenith? I mean, for the record, it's Zenith, I think. This particular watch is pure Zenith vintage goodness, and it's paired with a movement that's quintessential to the brand. Now, this came out alongside two other models this year as well. There's a rose gold variant as well as another stainless steel model. That one has a reverse panda dial configuration with a black dial, of course. I chose this one because of how faithful it is to the original A386 from the 60s. Speaking of which, the El Primero 3600 automatic caliber inside is the star of this watch. In fact, the dial display has been changed so as to indicate just what this movement is capable of. You don't often see a watch boast about its beat rate on the dial, but you'll find it printed here right under the El Primero word mark. This is a high beat movement. That 36,000 VPH translates to 5 Hertz. Even if you're the kind of person that finds little use for the chronograph function on your watch, you're gonna have fun with this one. Just look. When you press the first pusher, you literally watch the red chronograph seconds hand fly clear around the dial. It's honestly amazing to see in person. For all you Rolex Daytona lovers out there, and there are a lot of you, remember this.
For years, the Daytona was powered by a Zenith movement. Well, sort of. The Daytona reference 16520 was powered by a movement based on a Zenith caliber. Now, of course, in full Rolex fashion, it made many modifications to the mechanism before shipping it out inside of the Daytona, but it still originated from a Zenith caliber. With many modern watches, I often find myself feeling like the watch is wearing me rather than the other way around. That comes from the length of the lugs, case diameter, and case thickness. On most vintage watches, those are things I rarely have to think about, which is exactly the case with this vintage-inspired piece.
And for all the talk that 40 millimeters is the sweet spot sizing, I'd counter that with 38 millimeters. I picked the leather strap option over the bracelet mostly because the color contrast. You don't often see blue leather straps, and when you do, they can be a little bit goofy. But I think this watch leans so much into the color, and the blue just really ties it together. I think it's on bracelet, while it's really nice and it's a great bracelet, it ends up just being a little monochromatic, and a watch like this should really stand out. The dial is all about contrast, and by virtue of that, legibility. To that point, we have a black 100 seconds counter which stands out against the white dial surface. You've heard of a roulette date wheel. Well, for some reason, this reminds me of a literal roulette wheel, even if it's monochromatic. Something about the tall and thin numerals against that black background. But there is some red. That would be the chronograph seconds hand, which has a decided and dramatic bent end to it, which points down at the dial. It's a small design flourish, but it's all in the details. Of course, people are gonna talk about that 4:30 date window. And to be honest, you either love it or you hate it, and I'm not gonna change your mind. But it is important to note that it has historical precedent, dating back to the original '69 model. One thing I often hear from people is, oh, I love this watch, but I can't get it. And what's so great about the under-the-radar nature of Zenith as a brand is, with all its historical and watchmaking pedigree, not only can you find them, but you can buy them. And when it comes to price, this watch, with its high beat movement and wrist-perfect size, clocks in at a value-packed $8,400 as seen here on the blue leather strap, and $9,000 on the bracelet. That's $4,000 less than a Rolex Daytona. If you like your chronographs a little flashy, a little gold, yellow gold, Zenith also makes a whole range of watches that pay homage to the original A386. This is the gold G381. Actually, a lot of the aesthetic features of this watch are more faithful to the original A386, whereas the stainless steel model we're looking at today boasts a brand new movement inside with the 1/10 of a second chronograph function. This still retains that tachometer text on the dial. This is kind of a time capsule to an old watch, but in luscious yellow gold. From a movement and design perspective, it's hard to beat. Zenith as a brand has been sort of an insider's watch, but it doesn't have to be. Whether you have a solid gold piece or the classic stainless steel tri-color, you're wearing a watch steeped in history.